In this lesson, we are going to look at how we experience life. I need you to think for a moment, what is living? What do we mean by living? What do we do by living? And if you think for long enough, you will understand that we only do 6 things throughout our lives. We see things, we hear, we smell, we taste, we touch, and we think. And these are the only 6 things we do throughout our lives over and over and over again. Nothing more. And this is a very important concept for extinguishing your anger, because we will be using this concept in later chapters. But before that, we need to understand how we see, how we hear, how we smell, how we taste, how we touch, and how we think. So, what is seeing? Just think for a moment, what do we need to see something? We need our eyes. We need an external object. We should be conscious, because without consciousness, you can have an eye, you can have an external object, but you won't be able to see anything. That is why you don't see anything when you are sleeping, because you don't have this visual consciousness. So, to see something, the eyes, the external object, and the visual consciousness should come together. Only if these 3 things come together, you will see something. And when these 3 things come together, we always have a feeling. Either it's going to be a good feeling, a bad feeling, or a neutral feeling. And most of our feelings throughout our lifetime are neutral. But sometimes we have bad feelings, which makes us angry, and we have good feelings, which makes us happy. And once these 3 things come into contact, you have an identification of the object of what you are seeing. And if you are seeing this object for the first time, this identification portion is going to act as a memory flag, so that next time you see the same object, you are going to identify it as soon as these 3 things come into contact. And the next item is intention. This is not very prominent unless this feeling is good or bad. Just say that you see someone bullying your best friend. So, how do you see that? You have your eyes, you have the external objects, and you have the visual consciousness. And these 3 things come into contact, and you have a bad feeling, because what you see is your friend getting bullied, and you identify your friend getting bullied, and you have intention here. The intention would be to stop your friend from getting bullied. So the act of seeing needs all these 6 things to be completed, because any act of seeing is not going to be complete without any of these 6 components which makes up the act of seeing. And similarly, what is hearing? You have the ears, you have a noise, you have the ear consciousness, and these 3 things come into contact, and you either have a good feeling, bad feeling, or a neutral feeling, and then you have identification and you have an intention. For example, you turn on the radio and you hear your favorite song. So you have your ears, you have your favorite song playing on the radio, and you have ear consciousness, you are alive and you are conscious. And with the contact of these 3 things, you have a very good feeling. And you identify that it's your favorite song being played on the radio, and your intention might be to increase the volume. So the act of hearing needs all these 6 things to be complete. And let's look at smelling. You have the nose, you have the scent source, and you have nasal consciousness, And once these three things come into contact, you have either a good feeling, a bad feeling, or a neutral feeling. And you identify that scent and you have an intention. Let's look at tasting. You have the tongue, you have food or drinks, you have the tongue consciousness, and you have these three things coming into contact. And by doing so, you have either a good feeling, bad feeling, or a neutral feeling. And you identify that taste and you have an intention. And what is touching? You have your body, you have a touch, and you have physical consciousness. And when these three things come into contact, you have a feeling either good, bad, or neutral. And you identify that touch and you have an intention towards it. So, for example, you're walking on the road and someone bumps onto you. So, you have your body, you have the bumping onto you, you have the physical consciousness, and it will create a bad feeling for you. You identify that someone has bumped onto you, and you might have an intention to ask him in a rude way, watch where you're going. And similarly, thinking. You have your mind, you have your thoughts, you have mental consciousness, and when these three things come into contact, you have a good feeling, or a bad feeling, or a neutral feeling. And you identify what you are thinking, and you have an intention. Say, for example, you just had a big fight with your partner, and you are thinking about that scene. So you have your mind, you have the thought of fighting with your partner, you have the mental consciousness. So these three things come into contact and you have a very, very bad feeling. And you identify this thought, and your intention could be to go back to your partner and shout at him, or go back at your partner and tell him something you forgot to tell him during your fight. And that is how you experience the world. That is what life is. Our life is all about seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and thinking over and over again, and nothing more. And with that said, I'll see you in the next lesson.